Right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Friedrich-Naumann Foundation to a short 1-minute meeting on the situation in South Africa, which is in great turmoil. I'm going to be getting going straight away. There's just one thing I would like to mention. We are streaming this, we're doing this on several platforms. Unfortunately, only those of you who are on Zoom will be able to ask questions. On YouTube and on Facebook, we are live, but unfortunately, the question and answer function doesn't work on those platforms. So, without further ado, let me get started, and I'm going to do this in the order at which people appear on my screen. So, we have Karine du Plessis, who is a freelance journalist. Karine works and writes a lot about sub-Saharan Africa in particular, but is also very, very knowledgeable when it comes to local politics in South Africa. And we have asked her onto this panel in this capacity. Secondly, we have Mbali Ntuli. Mbali Ntuli is a member of the KwaZulu-Natal provincial legislature. So for the Germans among us, she is a Landtagsabgeordnete. And the Landtag, the provincial legislature she sits in, is KwaZulu-Natal, which is, of course, the epicenter of what we've been witnessing this week. Mbali is part of the leadership of the Democratic Alliance, that is the official opposition in South Africa, and obviously lives and works in what is the hardest hit province. Next, our third guest is Kwesi Sogoni. Kwesi works in the city of Johannesburg, also for the Democratic Alliance, for the official opposition. Kwesi's speciality is politics, and he is particularly active in local government. And he lives and works in Johannesburg, which was, other than KwaZulu-Natal, is in Gauteng. In other words, that is the province, Pretoria, Johannesburg. Those of you who have traveled to South Africa would have traveled into OR Tambo Airport. This is all part of Kwesi's home province. And I would, without further ado, I would like to hand over to Karine, who has kindly agreed to give us a little bit of an update about what's going on. The figures that I saw this morning, Karine, was that we are looking at an official death toll of 117 people, more than 1,400 people arrested, and 12 ringleaders under investigation. Would you like to explain to us what actually happened this week, very briefly?
Yeah, there's a long explanation and a short explanation. Hi, Barbara. Hi, everyone. This past 2-3 weeks have been a roller coaster in South Africa. And I think if you had asked anyone a week ago in South Africa if we could ever have foreseen what happened, I would have told you, no, this is, I mean, what has happened here has really deeply shocked everyone in South Africa. It is something I don't think we really have imagined. Yet a lot of it has felt very normal and very things that we've become very used to, elements that we've become very used to. Basically, it started with the former president, Jacob Zuma. He has to go and appear before a state capture commission. It's basically a commission on wide-scale government corruption under his watch. He didn't want to. The Constitutional Court tried to force him to. He ignored that order. He even walked out of the commission at some point. And the Constitutional Court went back and, in a very, very unusual, first of its kind ruling, said the former president has to go to jail for 15 months for something as stupid as disregarding a court order, because there's also a big corruption case that's just about 16 years old, also going on against the former president, and that might be a lot more difficult to prove. So the court said he must go to jail within 7 days or within 5 days, otherwise the police had another 3 days to go and arrest him. And He obviously didn't go to court, and there was a bit of a showdown. He lives in a rural area called Nkandla in KwaZulu-Natal province. He's got a big homestead that was also controversial at some point because taxpayers paid for upgrades to this thing, and he got into trouble for that too. Anyway, so there was a big showdown in front of the homestead, and people thought it was going to be bloody because some of his supporters came out, very militaristic supporters. They came out to defend him, but eventually he was peacefully taken to prison on, it doesn't feel like last week, Wednesday night last week in the middle of the night, he was taken to prison. So much has happened since. And then soon after that, a day or two after that, we saw his supporters basically said, we're going to shut down KwaZulu-Natal province. And we thought, it's happened before. People normally go and they sort of, they started with burning down trucks. That's been happening for the past three years, that truck drivers, Durban is a big port city, so trucks go to and from Durban with goods. Disgruntled truck drivers who've lost their jobs to foreigners. There's big politics going on there. They've been burning down trucks, and then sometimes the highway closes a few hours or there's some trouble. That started, but eventually it became so big that the highway had to close. It became massive. I think 25 lorries were burned down in that way, and they only reopened the highway now a week later. So it was closed for a long time. So Durban was cut off from the rest of South Africa in a big way, from Johannesburg at least. So the burning of trucks started, and we thought, whoa, that's bad. And then next thing over the weekend, we heard about the looting of malls in Durban. People started looting malls. And it's strange because we have a fairly good security industry. Our police is fairly good. But I think the cracks really started showing. And then I think by Monday, it was just, I don't know, Mbali might know better. I think about 200 malls in Durban were looted. That's I believe most malls there. People are not able to access food. Malls were burnt and looted and burned down. Warehouses where goods were kept, electronics, fridges, food. It started with food, and it spread to Johannesburg as well, but I think the pushback in Johannesburg was a little bit stronger. We had, in Durban, people were complaining the police were just watching on as these robbers, as communities ran into the shops, and they came out there with shopping trolleys full of loot. In Johannesburg, I think a few malls, I heard about 2 or 3 malls where that happened, where the police just looked on. But in a few other malls, the community pushed back. The community started standing around the malls, keeping the malls safe, using their bodies as shields where the police didn't act. So in Johannesburg, it's not that bad, but the situation's very fragile at the moment. And I think we're waiting I think there's going to be a government briefing now to update. But as Barbara said, 117 people killed. We suspect there's going to be a lot more, but I think even so, the death toll does not begin to explain the damage that has been done. And I think Mbali will probably talk more about the conditions in Durban. What's it like living in Durban? I spoke to one of her colleagues who said to me, I won't name him, but he basically said to me last week he was walking on the beach. Durban is a really beautiful city. It's a popular holiday resort as well, a holiday city as well. He was walking on the beach last week. This week, his basic concerns is survival and three things: to find food, to find fuel because the fuel supplies were cut off, and to find ammunition. And the ammunition that's a very scary part as well, because when the police failed, the community started organizing themselves, and people, some people have private handguns. We've been wanting to outlaw that in South Africa as well because we want a peaceful society. So some people had handguns, some people just came with golf clubs, cricket bats, anything they could find to protect their neighborhoods and to protect their malls. And that's given rise to some vigilantism and possible friction, racial tension. That's another element that's coming in there. And the origins of this some people call it insurrection, instigation. Some people say it's a highly organized operation by former intelligence agents who are still loyal towards President Jacob Zuma, former President Jacob Zuma, people who used to fight in the liberation wars. There's an big element of poverty, disgruntlement with government. People are hungry. There's the COVID. People are feeling alienated because of the COVID-19 lockdown. Alcohol. We've banned alcohol again for I think the past 2-3 weeks. Alcohol sales are forbidden because people get drunk. They ended up in hospital, and we need the hospitals. Yeah, sorry. Let me just also explain that context. We're going through a big third wave of COVID-19. So we had to go through a stricter lockdown, and a lot of people are ending up in hospital now. It's really, we've got the Delta variant, the Indian variant. We don't have, the vaccines are not that widespread yet, so we have a big problem. So I think, so there's feelings of alienation, feelings of poverty, hunger, big inequalities in South Africa. It's really, I think, to the point of, actually, in a way, I thought, what's happening is so completely alien, but in another way, I thought, my gosh, I'm surprised this didn't happen a lot earlier. And the reason why I also said it's alien, but it felt familiar, was that we've been seeing protests in communities almost every day now for the past 18 months. It started around 2007. I think community protests increased sort of significantly, and up to the point where they protesting every day because some communities don't have water, some don't have proper electricity, it's bad service delivery in municipalities, corruption amongst officials, which is a hangover from the Jacob Zuma era. So there's a lot of factors playing into what has happened in the past week. And in a way, I think it was preventable, but it wouldn't have been easily preventable. The president deployed 25,000 troops, which is basically our whole army now, to contain the situation. And I think it might quell some of the flames, but it's not going to be a permanent solution. If I heard an expert who does risk analysis, he basically said it will die down in the next 2 weeks, but it's going to intensify in the years to come if we do not significantly change the inequalities in this country. I'm not sure if there's anything I left out, but I think it will come up in our conversation.
Exactly. Well, I'm sure it will. Since you mentioned KwaZulu-Natal as where it started and where it's been most intense, Mbali, maybe we could go over to you. Any particular points you would like to add to Kareen's explanation for our viewers?
Well, I think Kareen gave a really great overview, but I think 2 things also need to be mentioned here. Firstly, this has been a perfect storm, as you said, of the intense inequality that we have in our country, the poverty that we see, the desperation. But there's also been criminal elements of people who really took advantage of what they saw was absolute chaos that was happening on the streets, who are really organized as gang members or just people that have had to resort to criminal behavior in the past, who were really able to capitalize on this. And you see that with things like so many cars that are on the highway that have been stripped, that have had their tires off, that have been sitting there for days. I don't think the ordinary looter who was looking for food or who was desperate to have something would have had the expertise at the time and the gall to just strip a car in the middle of the highway. And I've passed several of these cars myself. So there's definitely an element of people who are who criminal behavior that really capitalized on the chaos and the situation. I think secondly, it's also just shown how hollowed out our institutions have become. Because as a member of the legislature, we definitely got some reports that things might happen on a Monday. But as Kareen says, we've seen so many protests in our communities before that to some extent you understand that something might happen, but it's always happened in contained spaces in one town or for one particular issue. It's quelled down, the police have been able to deal with it to some extent. What happened this time was that there was just too much that happened all at once in too many different places. The police were slow to act because I don't think that they had the kind of intelligence to take the voice notes and the WhatsApp groups and the Facebook groups that were going on incredibly seriously. I myself didn't take it seriously, and I was one of the people that started running out of nappies on the second day because I took it for granted that I could just go down into my neighborhood shop and get some supplies. And I ended up on the second day having to queue for hours along with other people just to get basic essentials and necessities, because nobody had foreseen how bad the situation would get and on the scale that it would get. So rural towns, towns in urban peripheries, my entire neighborhood, there's not a single supermarket or store that sells food that hasn't been trashed and looted. I have had to go to very far places with fuel that, you know, I don't really have, because again, nobody filled up their petrol tanks because we really didn't know the extent. So I think the hollowing out of institutions has come out very clearly that if anything like this ever happened again with a real organization or better organization, we would be in total chaos and panic. And for many of us in KZN who had to drive past looters, who had people sort of banging on our cars while we were trying to go get food, who stood in long queue lines, sometimes over 9 hours, this is not something that we want to experience. There was also water cut off for a few hours in parts of Mbilo and Glenwood, which are suburbs in Durban. I mean, they were later reattached, but just the idea that you wouldn't be able to have water, you don't have petrol to get anywhere to be able to access help, there's no food, I think has really shocked people. And I will say that personally for myself, driving last night to drop off a cousin of mine who had been affected because her place of residence was surrounded by so much violence, I didn't take kindly to community groups who had so many weapons on them that weren't concealed, asking me to roll down my window and look and ask me where I lived and to give them exact addresses. I mean, I understood what they were doing and to some extent felt safe, but as a Black person in South Africa, seeing untrained people with guns that they're brandishing around really made me nervous. So I think that the chaos we've seen has fundamentally changed the way that we all see ourselves and understand the necessities of just basics, but also have exposed serious fault lines in the lack of institutions that we have. And this all happened under the former president, who allowed for a lot of cater deployment to happen. So we have a lot of people who are unqualified and untrained to deal with the mass of chaos that we saw happening. And in terms of the death tolls, I don't think we nearly are done with really assessing how many people have been hurt, because somebody that helps me in our home who hasn't been able to come help me because there's no transport, no public transport, told me that in her neighborhood, they were finding many people had died because of goods falling on them from people who would push them from the top of the warehouse. So people dying because microwaves landed on them or washing machines landed on them. And those people all got trampled over in stampedes. And so nobody's picked them up. I myself have seen several dead bodies as I've been driving around. And again, you can sort of see that they've been lying there for a couple of days, meaning that we just haven't had the services and the manpower to even clear up our streets. So it's been an incredibly scary sort of 7 days for all of us. And I think that it's left us all fundamentally altered. I'm certainly considering going on solar, and I think everyone will probably go on to gas going forward. And I don't know what we do about petrol, but looking at hybrid models of that is probably something that's also going to be things that people take into consideration.
Thanks, Mbali. Kwesi, if I could go over to you, and if I may then also appeal to you, I know you're the one among us who, inter alia, also has an economics degree. If you could talk to us about Johannesburg as and Gauteng as opposed to KwaZulu-Natal, or KZN as we say in South Africa. And also if you could say a little bit about what you can already foresee in terms of the economic consequences.
Thank you, Barbara, and good afternoon to everybody. I think I'll just start off with being a slight contrarian with my colleagues. I'd say that I think the signs were there that this was going to happen, precisely because of who our former president is and the support that he commands, and the type of support that he has. And I had a discussion with a colleague just offhand about, I mean, even last year, when the president was showing that he was very resistant to coming, that, you know, it was going to cause a lot of conflict. And I think I'm very disappointed in our political leaders that they weren't proactive enough. I think when you jail a president in any country, let alone South Africa, there's bound to be social unrest. So I think that I'm disappointed with the response and the lack of proactiveness from our leadership. In terms of what's happening in Johannesburg, Johannesburg is not as bad as KwaZulu-Natal. And I think Gauteng, how it's happened is that it's mostly the townships that have been affected. So the suburban areas have largely been unaffected, but the townships have been the most hit. And the intensity is not as bad as KwaZulu-Natal, but it's still quite a volatile situation. What we saw in Johannesburg is a lot of resistance. So it did, the looting started and the burning, but there was an immediate response from the communities on the ground. And the communities responded and they try and organize themselves to protect properties, which aren't even theirs. It's just the community's properties there. And I think it's sad because it's great because it just shows that there was a level of sort of community awareness and social awareness to try and resist, violent elements and criminal elements. But it also shows that there was an absence of law enforcement who just failed to act, and which led to people organizing themselves, and which led to the situation that Mbali spoke about people arming themselves because they feel they have no other option. And so Johannesburg has been hard hit, not as bad as KwaZulu-Natal and other cities in Natal. But I think that because the communities in Johannesburg have stood up and said they don't want this to continue any longer, it's sort of subsided somewhat. But we're still finding dead bodies popping up. I think there's been about 3 or 4 major townships that have been hit: Soweto, Vosloorus, and Alex. And the army has been deployed to several hotspots. And we are seeing that the situation is simmering down somewhat in Johannesburg at the moment. And I think that in terms of the economic impact, I don't think we started to feel just how bad it's going to be. So just anecdotally, for example, my mother, I had to get medicines for her this side because the pharmacies in where she lives in Soweto in a township, the pharmacies were looted. There was no food, there was no fuel as well, fuel shortages. So general supplies were just absent. So we had to find other means to basically get supplies to my family. And so we're in a much better position than people in KwaZulu-Natal, where I'm sure there's many, even if you drive kilometers out, you're not going to find supplies. So it's a very dangerous situation economically. I think that with KwaZulu-Natal being trapped off, it means that the flow of supplies and goods and supplies is going to be restricted quite severely. As we know, Durban is a massive port for the country. And if the entry at the main highway is blocked, then it means that a lot of places that need to be stocked with supplies are not going to be stocked, they're going to be delayed. My biggest concern, though, is going to be the job losses that we're going to see. So I do foresee a spike in unemployment because a lot of businesses have been devastated. And with that spike in unemployment, there's going to be a parallel spike in crime. So we might see like this cycle intensify of violence and unemployment and inequality and poverty. And my sort of concern is that I'm not sure if our government is proactively thinking about what's going to happen once the violence is, this current violence now has sort of simmered down, but then will they be able to assist the businesses recover? Will they be able to help people find employment again? And with us being in this current economic situation, I'm very, very skeptical about how our government is going to respond. But I do foresee a big spike in unemployment, which doesn't bode well for future, for any sort of social
peace.
Peace and stability, and just stability in general. So I think, yeah.
I would just like to point out, particularly to the people who have joined us on Zoom, that you are able to ask questions, which we will put to the panelists. Maybe just by way of explanation to some of the people who have joined us, Johannesburg and Tshwane, Pretoria, is the largest conurbation in the world that is not on any kind of waterway. So this national road number 3 between Gauteng and Durban, this very, very large harbor, is the lifeline. And that is why everybody's been referring to that, and that being choked off in terms of fuel, food, and everything else is it's literally like you got somebody at the, by the throat, like that. And I would like to pick up on 2 themes here, really, that all 3 of you have mentioned. The first one is that of social media. Now, I know that all 3 of you are very active on social media. You have drawn different conclusions from what you saw on social media, but I'd be very interested to hear what your observations are, because there is actually a law in South Africa forbidding, encouraging violence on social media, and yet we have seen people like one of President Zuma's daughters literally saying, burn it down. So I'd like to have some comments around that, and then also going to what seems to become clearer and clearer, and all 3 of you refer to it in some way. There seems to have been a driving force behind this. Some people go as far as saying there was an insurrection plan, namely to overthrow Cyril Ramaphosa's government, the purpose being that those who have, shall we say, done very nicely under Jacob Zuma and his patronage networks, trying to claw back what either they have lost or what they are going to lose. I don't know who wants to go first, but I will have all 3 of you on that. Who'd like to go first? Shall we do the same, right? Karin, do you want to go first?
Yeah, well, I think we all have a lot to say about this. But yeah, Barbara, I think one thing I did fail to mention, and just to get an idea of numbers, we're talking about unemployment and poverty and inequality. I think in South Africa, 11 million people don't have work, or they don't have any hope of finding work, and most of them are young people. The young people, I think, so there was it's something like half of all young people under 35 don't have work, which, as we know, is bad. People always call it a ticking time bomb. I think it's a bad cliche, but young people are energetic. They want an outlet, and also young people are very good on social media. The social media in South Africa, I read a statistic somewhere that we're about 50, 60 million people. There are 100 million phones. So people are very well connected. 100 million phone connections. Some people have more than one phone. So we're a very well connected nation. Data is very expensive. So that's the one downside. But people are on Twitter. They're a lot on WhatsApp groups. And I think it has fueled a lot of this insurrection. An ANC person sent me a video shot of a WhatsApp group called, I think, something like Burn Down eThekwini. eThekwini is the name of the metro in which Durban is. And it looks like it was planned. They said, oh, why don't we go and burn McDonald's? President Cyril Ramaphosa he used to own the McDonald's chain in South Africa before he became president. So it would be an example of that. Or, so it looks like it was planned on WhatsApp groups. There's a lot of fear being fueled on social media as well. Videos being sent around on WhatsApp groups, hashtags on social media, which kind of emerged in the past few days, especially. It looks like there's some concerted effort on the WhatsApp groups to stoke racial tensions and to stoke, and also like Cyril Ramaphosa must fall. Some people say, people are trying to provoke a coup d'etat, which I think might be a little bit difficult. But a few weeks ago, I would have thought it wouldn't have been possible. Now I'm thinking anything is possible. But the army's still strong in the president's favor. So I don't think it's that possible. But yeah, but I mean, I think, and also, I mean, we've been talking about it's all doom and gloom, harsh things, but there's been a few upsides for me as a journalist. And the one upside is that despite, I mean, okay, there are failures, I think, in the sense that we couldn't stop this incitement on social media, but in a lot of places we've seen social media being cut off. We've seen internet connections being cut. Even in neighboring, in the kingdom of Swaziland, Eswatini, the government cut, I think, for 4 or 5 days, they cut internet connections. And our government didn't do that. I think partially also because those people who were pushing back against the looters were also organizing on social media. But I would like to believe that we value freedom of speech to such an extent that, that we try and legislate around that and not cut that off. But it's played a big role. And I think it's become very clear that there are people inciting on social media. And to a certain extent, you want the government to arrest them and, to deal with them. But to another extent, I've seen the president's son, his children have been involved in inciting these things.
The ex-president.
I keep on calling him the president. I don't know. I think I'm going mad as well. Flashbacks to a few years ago when we reported him as the president. But he's got twin children. They're really beautiful, good-looking, young. And the son, Duduzane Zuma, he's been fueling that, him and the daughter have been feeling things on their social media. And I saw him on a video the other day with a leader of the Indian community. There's been some race tensions between the Black and the Indian communities. And he was standing there preaching peace and whatever. And he was using this sort of anarchy to show himself as a great, like he's like his father. He's there to make peace, like former President Jacob Zuma did in 1994 when we became a democracy. So to a certain extent, I think we need mediators. We need we need people like that to talk peace. But yeah, I think it's a complex issue for our government, and I think that perhaps more than once they thought, let's just cut off social media so that people don't, we stop stoking these fears and we start just kind of calming down.
Thank you, Karin. Mbali, what's your take?
Well, like I said, there were many things, and as Karina said, that were going and flying around social media that did give some sense that something might happen. But, we're a country that also had the Bell Pottinger scandal, which exposed how incredibly easy it is to infiltrate South Africans via social media and create narratives and really drive racial division. So we have become a country that has so much fake news and so many different narratives. Even our government, in terms of the political party, has so many different factions that you're never quite sure what it is that you can take seriously on social media. And I think that's why so many people were caught unaware. But what I think is a travesty is that our intelligence community was caught so unaware, especially given that they are part of the party that for a large part had people that were inciting this violence on social media. I mean, somebody who was the former leader in the ANC was inciting violence, and in fact the taxi associations have made him go on a bit of a tour apologizing because otherwise they were going to incite violence on him. So I mean, some people definitely are being caught, and I think there was an element of organization on social media. But I think for a country that still has so much racial tension, and particularly in KwaZulu-Natal and Durban, a long-standing history of racial tensions between Indian and Black people, it really exacerbated some of those feelings for people, and again gave people who might harbor those feelings about other races a good guise to really sort of act out and voice their opinions that were racially motivated. So I think all of that is also going to really play into the elections that we have this year. So we're supposed to be having local elections at the end of the year. We've already postponed what is called the registration weekend, which is when people register for those elections because of the COVID third wave. But it's very difficult not to have that election because it would take a huge 2/3 majority in our parliament to change that kind of law. But at the same time, with everything going on, it might be seen to be in favor of the governing party to do that, because at this point, I don't think politically any single party can say that they are absolutely sure about what the outcomes are going to be, because the devastation of people's lack of trust in all our politicians in this country, in all our political parties, has increasingly been getting worse. And I think after this, people are really going to consider whether or not they even really want the politicians that we see. And I think just lastly, I want to just touch on the economy in KZN. I think it's been estimated that it's going to take us over 2 years to rebuild the KwaZulu-Natal economy at this point. So many businesses that have been looted and burnt have said that they are unlikely to open up again. People who already were so decimated by the COVID waves that had to close down, our tourism departments, our hospitality industry, just is not going to be able to sustain itself given what's happening. And that's going to take real leadership to try and get us out of this quagmire. And as Karine says, Durban in particular is such a lifeblood for so many of our other economies in the country, that it's going to have a ripple effect. And one of the things that I remember seeing was that people were actually protecting the yeast factory in Durban, because the one yeast company actually supplies 2/3 of the yeast to every single bakery in the country, which means that people wouldn't have had a staple like bread. So our economy has been hit incredibly badly. And if we continue the way that we have, we aren't going to see recovery for even longer than 2 years, which, like Kwezi said, with already 10,000 jobs that are estimated to be lost, is going to make it even more difficult for us to curb inequality and curb the kind of desperation and poverty that we've seen in KZN.
Thank you, Mbali. Kwezi, could I have your input on this issue?
Thanks, Barbara. So I definitely agree with my colleagues. I think just something that Mbali mentioned about we have a massive disinformation problem on our social media platforms, especially when it pertains to political issues and social issues. So I think that would have fueled a lot of the unrest and the sort of anxiety. And I think as well that it would have a lot of the disinformation that I've seen was targeted specifically at stoking racial tensions and ethnic divisions as well. But also on the other hand, I think there is, I mean, Karine did mention like there is like a light, but the other light that I saw was that there was a lot of people who were sort of opposing that sort of negative and violent instigating on social media. One of our political leaders from the EFF, I think, misread completely how South Africans don't actually want this type of social unrest and violence. And there was he was met with a lot of sort of resistance and opposition on social media, with people saying, you know, even within the supporters of his own party, who say that this is not the way a leader should, especially a leader of his magnitude, should be speaking to the situation in the country. So social media has been a very dynamic space. And I think we've seen very the very negative aspects of it and its consequences. And there's also been a positive sort of resistance. I think it was Karine who mentioned WhatsApp. WhatsApp has been very problematic, I feel. But it's been, and I think that's where Mbali in terms of, she mentioned the intelligence, and I think that's where intelligence should have been able to pick up some of the things, because if there was a sort of this grand conspiracy of, you know, orchestrated a plan, a coordinated strategy to disrupt, to cause political instability, it would have come from senior members within the ruling party, within the ANC. And I think that intelligence circles should have been able to pick it up. And I think WhatsApp has probably been a very big mobilizing platform. And it's unfortunate, and the scary thing about it is that it's not visible to the general public, but the public is alive to what's happening on WhatsApp platforms, because eventually messages get forwarded and forwarded. So yeah, social media has played a very big role. And I think it partly explains why a lot of the arrests happen in the sort of metropolitan areas and the urban centers, rather than the rural areas. I know some of the rural areas have been affected, but it's mainly been the urban and peri-urban and metropoles that have been severely affected. And I think social media has played a role because of how quickly information is able to be transmitted and consumed. and people are able to act quicker in that regard. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's, yeah.
I've got a number of questions before me, and I'm going to combine them and bundle them a little because they actually pick up on what you've been saying. So one person that I know, for example, who knows a lot about South Africa, Wolf Christian Paas. Hello, Wolf Christian. He's asking, why have other impoverished areas, he's thinking particularly of the Eastern Cape here, not been affected? A question that goes along with that, and it is something that you mentioned in Bali, is how much of this is a or got started as a conflict within the ANC? And then again, the question, why, is this conflict not present in other parts, in other ANC regions or branches? Again, Cape Town, for example, versus Johannesburg. Bali, do you maybe want to kick off on that one?
So I think, and it's a very simplistic answer, but I think until we have really seen the full aftermath and have all had a chance to breathe, we'll be able to give something more detailed. But I think the reason that it was so hard hit in KZN was obviously because the former president is from here and commands his strongest support. Our current president is probably weakest in this part of the country, and also unfortunately chose to use words in a speech that he gave to us a few days ago, which in very couched or coached language sort of made it feel as though he was blaming the Zulu nation, which is the majority of the people in KwaZulu-Natal, for being tribalistic. And that also fueled and angered people who may not have originally really cared that much about what was happening to President Zuma. So I think the incarceration of the former president was the spark and the catalyst. But what we definitely saw, what I've heard from the ground, what I experienced was that many other people who were desperate and in poverty then were able to just tag along onto what was happening with the looting. I mean, there was an interview of an old gogo who was looked upwards of 70.
A gogo is a granny.
Oh, sorry, yes. Who looked upwards of 70, who was interviewed, and she had been badly hurt and trampled on and stampeded. And when the interview crew asked her, well, what were you doing there? She was like, I'm so hungry, and I was waiting for my social security payouts to come at the end of the month. But everyone around me had their fridges full and their kids had gone out to go get them food, and nobody could help me. And I was worried that I wouldn't be able to get food because everything was being looted now. And I've only got little children that I have to take care of. So I had to walk all the way to try and get some food. And in the process got stamped on and sort of hurt by the looters, and eventually I got nothing. She was even asking the camera crew to please take her home because she couldn't walk properly anymore. So I think that the spark was Zuma, and because he's popular here, the president fueled it with his remarks, which angered a lot of people. And then the rest was really just, as I said, criminal elements that cottoned onto the idea, and people who were panicked that they were going to starve if they didn't get a part of it. But I mean, like a place very close to me, Guamashu, every single person that you see there who's driving now has a new bicycle, and kids, some of them have bicycles for the first time. And some people have described it as the first time they've felt a little bit free, and that they don't have to worry about the daily pressure of where to find food or where to get, some sort of small jobs, that they're able to just buy basic essentials. And it just shows how incredibly complex this problem is. But I think that that's the reason why it kicked off so much here. And in terms of Gauteng, there's also quite a large Zulu contingency there that is strong in terms of its connections to the ANC factions that are considered to have instigated all of this in KZN. But yes, to answer the person who asked whether a lot of this comes from ANC infighting, most definitely. I think it's been very clear for us all that there's been two main camps in the ANC, and Karine will be able to speak about this far more than me right now. But certainly in my province, there's two main camps, which is the Cyril Ramaphosa, the current president, and the former president. And their clashing is really at the epicenter of our entire political debacle that we find ourselves in the country at the moment.
I've got one question before I hand over to Karine to wrap this point up. I've got one question from Malte Weishauer from the German Chamber of Industry and Commerce. Is your impression that Zuma is willing to help calm the situation down? if you could address that point as well.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
No, I think let Karine go, and then we'll.
Okay, yeah. Now, before I do that, I just see that there's a government briefing on at the moment. The deaths, another 89 deaths were reported in KwaZulu-Natal. So there's 212 people that have died in total in the country now. And I think it's not good. And it also looks like they found some ammunition. People were looting. I think there was some reports. Bali's party put out a statement: 1 million rounds of ammunition was looted. And
1.5 actually.
Yeah, but it's enough to start a war. So let's hope that there's no phase 2 of what's happening. With regards to the infighting in the ANC and former President Zuma, yeah, I mean, he's sitting in jail at the moment. People are hoping, his supporters want him to have a presidential pardon. I was just listening to a press conference again by his supporters today saying he's the first political prisoner after 1994 in South Africa because he was jailed unfairly. I'm not sure. I mean, I think they could use him to try and quell tensions. But again, I mean, like his son, Duduzane, they thrive in this kind of anarchy because even though he would not have spoken the word or said to his supporters, go and attack or go and loot, it's kind of understood that he implicitly supports this. If he comes out to quieten it, it might work, but there's a big conundrum at the moment. I mean, do we allow him to come out and say, I'm so powerful, I can just, say something and they will all, I can make them stop, and let him out of prison and completely overrule our courts? Because something that's very important for the current president is that our institutions are seen to be working, that they function properly, that the president does not influence what the courts, the judiciary does. So it's a bit of a catch-22 really, because former President Zuma might be able to silence these people, perhaps not the criminal elements, but he could prevent this thing from going further. But you can't just let him out of prison without following the right procedures, or so it's a big conundrum. But I think the reason also why there was a question about the other provinces, the dynamics in the other provinces are very different. Eastern Cape, I think that there was some fears that it would spill over to the other provinces, but perhaps the intelligence networks there picked up what was happening. The minibus taxi operators, they're real gangsters sometimes. There's a lot of wars. They drive around with guns. I mean, these are the guys that provide public transport for the majority of South Africans. They drive around with guns. There's big politics, assassination. Some of them are sort of assassins, or they go into that sort of gangsterism. But they've played a big role in preventing the malls from being looted. I'm not sure why, because I mean, they said it's bad for their business, because then they can't take people to the malls to shop. But I read a story this afternoon where people have to drive further now to go to malls. So in a way, that should benefit the taxi operators. But thank goodness there were some elements in the provinces. I mean, there's a lot of different dynamics in different provinces that push back against the looters. So yeah, I'm not sure. Is there anything I didn't answer?
No, I think we're good there. Kwesi, you talked in particular about unemployment and youth unemployment, and then also, I mean, this has been, if this was a boxing match, we would say it was left hook, right hook, wasn't it? It was COVID and now this. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of support, if any, that people have been receiving either throughout the COVID epidemic and these very, very, very hard lockdowns that we've had in South Africa, in the beginning, the hardest lockdown in the world. And what do you foresee what can actually be done now from the government side, if anything, in terms of support?
Thanks, Barbara. So people have been receiving very little support. I mean, there was a lot of support that was promised. But I mean, you'll find that people will say, some people are saying, where is our COVID grants? What happened to the 500 billion rand that was meant to be used to support the businesses? but the main sort of source of support has been the grants, the social grants. And I mean, the country is under severe strain, and in terms of like the tax base is basically squeezed, squeezed dry, and the country is running on loans. And I don't know how much sort of fiscal capacity the government has to be able to like support the people who've been who've suffered from COVID and now from the situation. The government continues to make a lot of promises and commitments, but they fail to live up to a lot of them, which continues to anger people and cause frustrations. And I think a lot of the looting that happened, a lot of people just said, you know what, if our government cannot deliver, we'll do it ourselves, type of thing. And I think that the lack of sort of financial and economic support that's been made available to the citizens and to a lot of people has sort of added to the situation in a very, very negative way. So I think going forward, Ramaphosa will have, the president will, and the government will have to find, make wiggle room, take money from a lot of institutions that have, that right now may not be the priority. And that money will need to go to businesses so that businesses can hopefully recover. Mbali mentioned that it might take 2 years for the KwaZulu-Natal economy, which is, I think, the second or third biggest in the country, to come back. And that's a lot of jobs on the line. And for us in Gauteng, it's going to, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what the economic impact is just yet, because they still have to assess how much damage has happened. But it's a lot of devastation that's happened. The small businesses that have been affected support a lot of people, and in South Africa, one job usually feeds quite a big household in South Africa. And so, if you're losing 10,000 jobs, it could affect 100,000 people, for example. So it's a very scary situation. The government has to come up with quite a strong economic package. It has to address the social issues. So it might need to add on to the social grants, and it definitely has to find a way to support the businesses as well. There's also, beyond just businesses, just like the industrial breakdown that we've seen in KwaZulu-Natal is quite scary, because KwaZulu-Natal supplies, there's a lot of supplies that land at the port in Durban. And a lot of warehouses have been burnt. I saw that agriculture farms were burnt down as well. And those are massive economic, massive employment hubs. So if you're burning down a factory that employs 600 people, yeah, it's quite a serious situation. So I'm hoping that the government is proactive and coming up with an economic stimulus package. But I'm hoping that it goes to the right people. Because what we've seen in South Africa is that where there are packages that are created, they often don't go to the people who need it the most. And so I think that's going to be something that we will have to watch out for as we move along. Yeah.
Thank you, Kwesi. And we've literally got about 5 minutes left. So I'd just like to go around once more, starting with you, Mbali. Do you see a way forward? Do you see some light at the end of the tunnel? What needs to happen? You particularly mentioned politicians. You are a politician. What can people like you do?
Look, I'll be very honest. Before this week, I was questioning the usefulness of my own role and my own political career, because I had just gotten so frustrated and demotivated about everything that was happening. And I think for myself, seeing how everybody came together and also just understanding really what it is at stake, because it hasn't been a very long time since I've been affected by the basic essentials that I haven't had, like petrol and water and bread and that sort of things. I'm more galvanized personally to actually stay in the fight for the country and for what needs to be right. I also have a toddler daughter, and I'm constantly worried about her. But I think the best thing for me is to continue to try and find a way for us to really mobilize people on the ground to go forward. I think we need a massive reshaping of our South African political structure at the moment. And I'm looking forward to actually trying to find like-minded people to try and lead that, because I think people need hope, and I think people are tired of politics as they usually have been done. And I think now people are also going to have a lot more faith in themselves after they've protected their communities, after they went out and showed that they were willing to protect other people's resources and shops and everything, because they understood how it was important for all of us. And so I think, in as much as there has been chaos and lawlessness and genuine fear, there's also, for me, a sense that people actually now understand that they need to get their hands dirty if they want to turn the situation around, and they've seen it work firsthand. So I think that there is a glimmer of hope in that, and it's just going to take a lot of good people to keep that going, in terms of what we do electorally and what we do in terms of our political structures going forward. So, I mean, it sounds awful to say, but I'm excited for what this holds for the next chapter for us in South Africa. We're a very resilient bunch.
Kwesi, over to you.
I think Mbali has covered what I'd say. I think I've got hope as well. I do agree. What excites me is, maybe excited is a wrong word, but what I'm looking forward to is people feeling empowered, like Mbali mentioned, which I think is the most important factor if we are going to try and change a political system. And I think, if people feel empowered, I think it's going to help mobilize us in a more positive direction, and have more positive social impact and political impact as well. So I am hopeful. And I'm hoping that businesses also come together, the ones that are standing. So we need capital to come together and assist, because they are not immune to the social unrest as well. So yeah, I've got hope.
Thank you, Kwesi. Karin.
Yeah, I must say, it sounds boring, but I also have hope. It's Nelson Mandela's birthday on Sunday, the 18th of July. We celebrate Mandela Day by doing good deeds, by doing, giving the poor, I know my family, my mom and my sisters are knitting scarves that they're going to give to kids who are cold. And I think in that spirit, communities are putting together, communities are saying, let's clean up this mess. Let's clean up the mess that the looters and the criminals made. So perhaps, and I think in a way it's shaken our viewpoint again. We all know every day when we go out there, we know this is unsustainable. We see people, as middle classes, we live in nice houses. We sit here warm. I'm sitting with a heater next to me. It's in the middle of winter, but there are people who don't have that. There are people who, for the price that I pay for a dinner, it's what they earn in a week or in a month sometimes. So we know it's not sustainable, and hopefully it will spur us into action, into not waiting for government to take action and to distribute things more fairly, but to be kinder to each other and to pull together as the rainbow nation that we are. So I think in that sense we're strong, and we've done a lot of work since 1994. There's been a lot of conscious work, people talking to each other, reconciliation, and I hope that holds. There's a lot of things that divide us still. There's a lot of things that are wrong, but I think there's hope.
Well, I've always, in my long years of living in South Africa, the one thing I've learned is South Africans always make a plan, as you guys say. And again, I think a plan will be made. So I unfortunately need to bring this session to an end. There are quite a few more questions. I have more questions, but we can't do that. So let me finish now by thanking our three panelists, Kwesi, Mbali, and Karin, very much. But I would also like to have a bit of a shout out for my colleague Kati Giorgosaki, who pulled this together in a day and a half, and for our colleague Leo Schlesinger, who made it all work technically. And I wish you a safe weekend above all. And as you said, there is still COVID out there. We are in a massive third wave in South Africa. And at this stage, you know, in my own circle, I don't think I know a single family who has not had a bereavement, who has not lost someone. So, yeah, another South African Think Sterkte, wishing you all the strength. Bye-bye.
Thank you.